Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third seminar of CRC, Creative Research Challenge. For this webinar, we will have Professor Leah Carroll from UC Berkeley. She will walk through the research proposal and how to prepare for that. Professor, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Leah Carroll, and I work at the Office for Undergraduate Research and Scholarships at UC Berkeley, and I'm trained as a sociologist. I have a PhD from UC Berkeley, and I give proposal writing workshops as a major part of my job.
Great. Thank you for for coming here and help us with this seminar. So before we start, since CRC have its own proposal, so we would have our research team here to talk briefly about our proposal, and then Professor Leah will walk you through the whole process. All right, I will stop sharing my screen. And Apuva, can you and your team go over the proposal, please?
Yes, definitely. So although the information provided in this webinar is very, very credible and is what will most likely be seen throughout most of the, whenever you do the research proposal, for our specific one, it is worded a bit differently. The submissions.
You can share your screen, actually.
Sorry?
Screen, actually. So if that helps.
Oh, I don't have, I'm not sharing the screen.
Oh, I just made you a co-host, so.
Oh yeah, I don't have anything to share. Oh, Bakul, is it possible if you or Nora can share?
I can pull it up.
I personally on my phone, I'm not entering on my laptop, so I don't think that I can share it right now.
Okay.
I have it here in my email somewhere.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I apologize. I was just gonna verbally state that some of the information provided, like the introduction, background, and other stuff like that, is typically seen in a research proposal, but the way that we word it is a little different from what will be worded in the webinar today. That's, yeah.
Okay, I found it. Is it the guidebook or the orange one? It's the orange one, right?
Yeah, it's the orange one.
Okay. Sorry about the delay. Okay.
All right, thank you so much. So Apuva, can our team go through this sample real quick?
Yes, definitely. So within the CRC, what CRC asks for when turning in the proposal sample is an introduction and background to your research question, as well as picking a certain track when you fill up the information in the submission form, the objective and significance, which basically talks about like the goal of your research and why it's important to your specific research question, and then the methods behind your research question, which is listing some of the research methods that you'll be using in with your question, and then coming up with other unique methods that you could use or that you potentially will want to use when you continue on with your research. Also providing a little bit of literature review, As along with that would be anticipated results, which would just talk about what you think the results will come out to be, like as a preliminary hypothesis type thing, and then talk about the significance of the project. That's a little different from the significance and objective, in the sense that that's the goal of your research, and then the significance of the project being how the question plays a huge part in the world around you. If the research team wants to add anything more, please do so.
Yes, Approval, do you want me to share what the submission form will be look like? Or that's enough to show?
It's
The
up to
Google
you.
form.
I think, sorry.
Do you want me to share screen with the Google form?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. It seems I don't have access to, okay. So as Approval mentioned, we are breaking up the proposal into some small pieces. So each part, like objective introduction methods, have its word limit. So and the first part, you will be enter your personal information, and then the second part you should enter the proposal, but it will be in some small chunks. I hope it makes sense.
All right, thank you so much. Yes, so our own CRC proposal is kind of different from Leah's, Professor Leah's presentation, but you guys can gain more knowledge from Professor Leah's presentation, so that from now on you can do your own research proposal based on her knowledge today. So Professor Leah, can you proceed with your presentation, please?
Okay, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm wondering, so is there a way to, I can see the gallery, right? It's a small enough group that it would be useful to me to have people kind of tell me the working title for their projects that they're thinking about, because then I can pull up examples from what you're doing. Is that all right?
Yes.
Can they
yes,
talk? Is it really a webinar or just a Zoom meeting?
Yes, they can unmute themselves and talk.
Okay. I guess I'll call on people, and okay, Nora and Jasmine, and Apurva, you're part of the leadership, right?
Yes, we are.
Yes.
Okay, so Bagul, what's your project?
I'm in the team as well, actually.
Oh, sorry. Okay,
Yeah.
Mahi?
There's actually chat.
Chat. Oh, okay, people are responding by chat.
Yeah.
Related to psychology? Okay, so you're pretty open so far? All right. Sin-Yun?
Oh, yes. Me and my group member want to talk about, like, let me see the email, sorry. So we have some topics that most about the relationship between the lockdown and economic, that is.
The economic impact of the lockdown?
Yes.
Okay.
So actually we are discuss like which topic we finally choose about, because we have so many ideas and we don't know whether we should choose. So
Okay,
yeah.
well, this is really useful information for me to know because I have different pieces of my presentation that I can emphasize more,
Okay.
depending on where people are. So, okay, and Hongdin.
Oh, she's typing into the chat.
Okay. Okay, so Mahi says COVID effect on mental health, very interesting. Especially professionals. All right, and okay, COVID and mental health, but still fine tuning. Great. How about Jennifer?
Oh, I think Jennifer, she is looking into sociology, but I'm not sure what topic she is looking into. Yeah.
Okay. If she race, okay, race and racism. Okay, and then please forgive me if I'm massacring your name. Xiangmin Bei. Business major. COVID on the stock market. Okay. All right, how about Bong Hyungjin? Or Maya? Either one of you, if you want to put into the chat.
Would it be all right if I were to go and say it out loud? Would that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
either one.
Okay, thank you, Leah. So, thank you for taking. Oh, I don't know if somebody's replied to the chat, but so my research topic is about the food supply chain, and let me try to go and read over it. So it's mostly about the food distribution and the food supply chain and finding cost-effective ways to go and mitigate like the issues that arise due to mass food chain disruption.
Okay. People are worried the scope of the research is too broad. It always starts too broad, and whenever you feel that way, you should listen to that little voice because it's always true. But that's okay because everyone's research begins too big. All right, well, this is great because this is giving me a really good sense of where people are. So let me share some resources with you. So this is research.berkeley.edu. And there's lots of good stuff here, especially in this resources link. So I'm going to start with this, writing research proposals, because I think one of the elements here was strategies for getting started or something like that. My philosophy of research, especially undergraduate research, but really all research, is the key is keeping yourself happy and productive. And that means allowing yourself to be imperfect, putting imperfect things down on paper, and breaking things into really small parts, and getting lots of help at every step of the way. So here's some approaches for just starting, because the sooner you start, the sooner it's going to be better. So you got to just find ways to put things down on paper. So there's the Swiss cheese approach. Is this big enough? Can people see? Can I make it bigger? Okay. The Swiss cheese approach. So just like a piece of Swiss cheese holds together despite its holes, the idea is you're going to write what's in your head, and you're just going to try to kind of sketch your argument down or your hypothesis. And if you run into you get to this point where it's like, I wonder if that's really true. Do I really have the support to say this? Is there a citation for this? Don't do that. Just write out. You see how this person has written, find out if this is true. If so, cite. Okay, so you just keep writing and put in brackets everything you need to find documentation for. And you deal with that later. It allows you to get your argument down on paper a lot faster, and then people can give you feedback. Because until you put something on paper, no one can help you. Low-hanging fruit approach. So I am, the phrase low-hanging fruit is when you're trying to, you want to pick a bushel of apples and you go to the tree. You don't start with the apples at the top of the tree, right? You go with the ones that are really easy to reach. So that's what you do here. You're going to write the part of the proposal that's clearest in your head and that's easiest for you. So it could be the research question, it could be the background, it could be what others have said about your topic, or the methodology, or your qualifications. I have found that the qualifications part tends to be easy to write, although I guess it's not part of the template you're turning in, but do they turn in also a resume? Leaders?
No.
No? Okay. So just write whatever is clearest to you. Another approach, Dory's approach, remember, just keep swimming. So the idea behind this approach is to give yourself a time limit. If the task of sitting down and putting something on paper is really making you anxious, make it a really short time limit, maybe 10 minutes. And you're just going to keep writing, even if you don't have anything to write. You're just going to write, I don't know what to write. I don't know what to write, for a few sentences. And then some thoughts will start coming and you'll start producing something, and you're going to find that some of it can be kept. And then you'll be past the blank stage phase. There's also a variation on that theme where you make yourself work for 40 minutes, and anytime like something you're worried about or on your to-do list comes in, you write on a little pad of paper what it is, and then you go back to really focusing on your task. And if you have a very technical project, there's Grandpa Stan's approach. This is where you pretend you're explaining your research question to someone who's interested, but really not in your field at all. And this is something that forces you to break it down into easy to understand components, and get rid of jargon and why it matters. All right, so all of these are ways to getting something on paper, which is the crucial thing. So engineers have this thing called iteration. Has anyone ever heard that term? So iteration means when you're an engineer, you design something and then you test something and somehow it doesn't work the way you hoped it did. And you go back and you tweak the design, and then you test it, and then you tweak it. And that's pretty much the way you write a proposal. You write a draft, you get feedback on it, and then you revise it, and then you show it to people again, and then you get feedback, and then you revise it, and you just keep going with this cycle of revision. But you got to get it started now. All right, questions about these things? It really does help with the anxiety. You just have to allow yourself to write something imperfect. All right, and now I'm going to show you. So here on resources to workshops, and then you can see my other workshops that are there too. But here's where my PowerPoint is. Downloaded. Okay. There's my contact information if you want to get in touch with me later. So the overarching proposal structure we'll talk about. We'll talk about choosing a topic and narrowing it down. And I can talk a little bit about the heart of the proposal, the statement of purpose. Basically, what you're being asked to write is a statement of purpose. So it's a very short version of a proposal, but usually a much longer proposal would begin with a proposal like the one you're going to write. So you're basically writing a statement of purpose. Okay. So this is a proposal structure, and you'll notice that it's actually quite similar or parallel to what you're being asked to do for March 12th. So you're going to begin with a quick overview. It's called intro in your version. Then you have background and justification, where you show your influences or you talk about the literature. You say how the literature is lacking, how there's a gap, and how you're going to do something new. And you also may defend your choice of case, like Jennifer was going to do something on race, and maybe she's going to actually decide to focus on the Black Lives Movement in Oakland last May. All right, and that will be her case, and she's going to do some analysis of that. The plan are all about showing feasibility and the budget. So here's the thing, you want your project to be both original and feasible, because that's what really makes the committee happy. But something that's incredibly original might not be very feasible, might be really hard to do. It's never been done before. And something that's really, really feasible might be boring, because the reason it's so doable is because it's been done a zillion times before. So you want something that strikes a happy medium. And then I'm going to skip qualifications for now because it's not part of what you're working on. But usually when you're applying for some kind of grant proposal, at some point in the application, they're going to want to know that you're actually qualified to carry out this research that you are proposing. All right, questions about the overall structure? Now, choosing a topic, which I know a lot of you are in the throes of choosing a topic. The perfect topic is new enough to be exciting, both to you and to other people. And ideally, it's going to let you explore new areas, maybe something that you're considering majoring in. But it's old enough that you have a foundation of knowledge and skills to build on. So you don't want it to be a complete departure from anything you've ever done before. So if you're like a business major, maybe proposing a humanities project, you're not really going to have that training in Shakespeare or whatever that you need to do it right. So keep those things in mind as you're choosing a topic. And then think about the moments, I call them light bulb moments or aha moments that you've had in your favorite classes, and follow that clue. What have been your favorite classes? And within those classes, what have been like the favorite weeks on the syllabus? And think about what kind of questions the authors were taking on in that week of the syllabus. And make a list of them, and you may find that there's common themes. Another approach entirely, leaders, sorry, I forgot to ask this. Are they being asked to find a professor to sponsor them?
Yes.
Yes, okay, so Another approach entirely to choosing a topic is to choose a topic that's within the jurisdiction of your favorite professor. Because in all honesty, it's often easier to find a topic than to find a professor who's paying attention to you. So that can be a very practical way to approach the choice of topic. Okay, feel free to put questions into the chat or just out loud. I mean, there aren't very many of us here. Oh, thank you, Jasmine, for posting the link. All right, now research question. This is really, really crucial, and it's different from a lot of things you may have been doing, because up until now you've been assigned what's called a research paper, but sometimes, like I remember I was assigned in high school, I was assigned this paper on, it had to be a paper about immigration. And I decided to write about how evil the nativist movement was. And so I knew what I wanted to argue. And I went to the library and I got lots of books that talked about how evil the nativist movement was. And I got an A+ on that paper. I was very proud of it. But I wasn't actually doing original research. I was synthesizing existing research. And I was going into the library with my mind already made up on what I was going to find. When you're doing research, you should be going into the library like a detective rather than a lawyer. Do you understand the distinction? So you shouldn't know the answer to your question yet. Are there going to be any science proposals? It's social science and business, right?
Yes.
Yeah, there's no
Okay, all right.
science. Yeah.
Good. That helps me shorten things. So let's see. And no humanities either?
Not specifically humanities, no.
All right, good.
But there is social science, yeah.
All righty. So social science. Now the social science people, I am a fellow sociologist. I have written in this thing about the detective and the lawyer, especially for social science people, because they will tend to choose a topic because they care a lot about it and they have opinions about it already. And they'll write the question saying, in this research paper, I'm going to prove this and that and the other. So it's like, wait, you already have your conclusion, but you haven't collected any data yet? How is that possible? That's not research, right? So again, really, given that you know a lot about your question, you want to push further into your topic and figure out what you're still curious about. So in my case, I study human rights in Colombia. And when I was choosing my dissertation topic, I might have incorrectly just made an argument about why the human rights situation was bad in Colombia. But that really would have been kind of like documentation of something that everyone already knew rather than research. So instead, knowing that the situation was bad, I pushed further into it and discovered that something was really mysterious to me, which is why the human rights situation was so much worse in some regions than in others. All right, and that's a real question. That's a detective question, not a lawyer question. So you want to choose a why question, not just what happened, but what caused it to happen, or what is the effect of it having happened, or what is the meaning? Right? Those are all legitimate ways of doing your question. Now, in business, or if you're proposing a public service project, it's a little bit different. You wouldn't have so much a question as an objective. And I know that was because you do have one of your categories is business, correct? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So instead of a question, you might have an objective that you want to identify, like your objective might be to identify an opening in the market for some kind of new shoe that you're going to produce, right? So maybe now that we're in COVID and nobody can see your fancy heels anyhow, there's like a booming market in really comfortable shoes to wear around the house, for example. So you would kind of try to identify, your objective would be to identify the niche of shoe wear that's growing. All right, questions about the question? Oh, okay. Rationale. So this is what is called in your proposal. Darn it, I don't have it in front of me. It's the one, it's the last one. It's called Significance of the Project. I call it Rationale, but it's the same thing. So this is the larger, like pretend you have your findings already in hand. Who's going to care about them besides like you and your professor? And why? So if you're doing a social science project, often there would be policy or social intervention implications. Like, for example, in Hong and Mahi, they're both looking at COVID and mental health. Maybe if they discover that people who live alone are being especially hard hit by COVID, that a possible social intervention could be to come up with social groups, at least on Zoom, that these isolated people could join, or maybe connect neighbors so they can walk together. So that would be a possible social intervention. All right. All right. So I heard a lot of people talking about narrowing it down. I was contemplating cutting this section, but I won't because I think it's very relevant. So I'm going to touch on this just in case we have someone doing something kind of on the anthropology end of social science where you might be interpreting. Like maybe you wanted to identify metaphors that were used in Trump's speech or Trump's tweets. Try to figure out which metaphors he used a lot and what they meant. So you'd be focusing on the meaning of a specific theme, and maybe you decide to zero in on the theme of winning and losing. So you would maybe just pull out, you'd zero in, maybe just look at 1 year of tweets and only the tweets that address winning and losing. And that would become the text that you're looking into, and you try to figure out in what context he uses this metaphor most and what meaning it has. All right. Another way of narrowing it down, if you have a comparative historical question. So this is if you're trying to figure out what happened and why. So let's say, Jennifer, I'm drawn to Jennifer's topic because I'm also a sociologist, but let's say you decide to look at race in the Black Lives Matter movement in Oakland, and you are going to maybe try to explain a particular event, maybe when things got violent and a lot of windows were broken, and you're going to try to explain how that happened. So, or maybe you start with all vandalism and you want to narrow it down more. So you can narrow the topic down by chronology, geography, and theme. So maybe instead of all of Oakland, you're just going to look at downtown. And maybe instead of all of 2020, you're just going to look at May. And maybe instead of all vandalism, you're going to look at vandalism that allegedly was carried out by Antifa, right? So those are all ways, easy ways to cut it down. So in this example, you can go from something huge like China's economy to something much more focused like Shanghai's toy making industry in the 1990s. As you can see, I've narrowed it geographically and thematically and chronologically. Another way to narrow things down is to choose a causal arrow of your original contribution. So let me just try to have you imagine this because it'll slow me down to actually put it in writing. But imagine you're going to do a topic related to the wildfires last August, which were like the longest wildfire season ever in California. And if you're to try to explain how that happened, you might say, well, it was caused by extra dry weather, which was caused by a drought, which was caused by climate change, which was caused by global warming, which was caused by fossil fuel, which was caused by the dominance of the car industry in the US government, and which was caused by, and you can see that that can go back infinitely in time, right? And then in terms of the implications of the wildfire season, you could talk about, people, health issues for people with respiratory illnesses, economic losses, home displacement. You can see how easily this could get really out of control, right? So this is why you want to choose a single causal arrow. So a causal arrow is one that goes, for example, drought to wildfires. That's one causal arrow in that long chain that I described. So you're just going to focus on one link. One link is going to be your original contribution. And everything else, you're going to keep it short. You're going to keep really present in your mind that it's not your main focus, that it's framing and background. And you're going to use secondary literature to answer it. And you're not going to let it get long because you're going to have your blinders on and you're going to say, nope, that's not my arrow. I'm on the drought to wildfire connection. All right, questions on that? Okay, so this is just on the idea. I know none of you are STEM majors, but whenever you're narrowing down your topic, do it with your faculty mentor. Because you want to narrow it down. First of all, they know more about what's been done and what hasn't been done. They might know more about the availability of sources. And they're certainly going to be able to say, don't narrow it in that direction because I know nothing about that. Narrow it in this direction that I know a lot about, because then they can help you more. So do it in consultation. So you can propose a way to narrow it or a topic, and they might counter propose, or you could even ask them to assign you a topic, and then you might tweak what they say. All right, any questions? Oops. I'm going to skip down. I'm almost out of time, right, Jasmine?
Oh no, you still have a lot of time, so please. It's like 1:45 right now, but we can still do it until 2:15. So you still have like 30 minutes.
Okay. Do you usually take a break? Or
Oh
usually
no, if you need to, then we can do it, but usually we don't.
Okay. This is fairly intense, so All right, here we go. So you're doing a very abbreviated version of this, but in a longer proposal, this is more of a big deal and you have to have citations. So I'm going to tell you about this for the next proposal you write, and the same concept is exactly what you're going to put into your background section. This is the part where you are, oops, sorry, okay. You're going to justify your choice of case, like I'm interested in mental health and COVID, and I've decided to look at this in professors at Laney College. They happen to be close at hand, for example. So you're very briefly going to say, I'm looking at the mental health of professors at Laney College because they are, they're typical of community college professors in California. And they might be, yeah, you could just argue that they're typical. You might argue that they're anomalous in some ways, like maybe there are, my impression with Laney was that there's a larger arts department there than elsewhere. And so there's a larger proportion of professors who really can't do their work without it being in person, because they used to have studios, for example, or wet labs. So then that would make them an interesting anomaly because they'd be especially hard hit by COVID. Sometimes you choose your case because it's an influential example, or might be a good choice for some other reason. So that's a really short piece of your background and justification section. I think you've referred to it as objective and significance. So the equivalent on your proposal is objective and significance. Now, here's where you get into how your proposal is going to be original. But you have to prove that it's original by saying that you know what's been done already. So you want to say, I'm not reinventing the wheel. I'm building on existing literature. But I'm different from that existing literature in this specific way. All right. And another way of saying this is what hasn't been done yet, and how does your project fill this gap? Now, fortunately, yours is pretty short, so you don't have to have 10 sources necessarily. But you still might want to kind of figure out what's been done. So some standard ways of not getting overwhelmed by this task, because if you really think about it, it's like, oh, wow, I have to find everything that's ever been written on my topic before March 12th. You can really get yourself freaked out. So don't do that. So you might want to survey your library database kind of in the intuitive way, survey it by subject, and then make a list and try to approach people who know more about it to help you prioritize your list so you don't end up wasting a lot of time reading stuff that's not going to be significant. Google Scholar can tell you which items on your list get cited more. We can skip the next one. There are these amazing things called review articles. And you remember we've all written book reviews, correct? But a review article is where rather than reviewing 1 or 2 books, they will review 20 at once that are all written on the same topic. And they'll compare them to each other and they'll put them in different groups. And if you can find one of these things on your topic, you have hit the jackpot. So I have a link here to reference librarians at UC Berkeley, but that won't help you too much. But I bet you have reference librarians at your community colleges too. And I will tell you that reference librarians they're highly trained, and they often sit around waiting for people to come. They're an underutilized resource, so I really, really urge you to find those people and make use of them. Once you do find a few good articles, and these should be articles that are trying to answer the same question you set aside for yourself. So you want to trace the bibliographies. All right. Questions on this part? Finding sources? This is all fairly abstract until you've actually dived in and tried to do it. So now let's say you have found your literature that you want to cite, and you're wondering, how the heck do I organize this? Well, this is the idea. You want to imagine that you have organized a seminar where all these people that are in your background and justification section that you're citing, they're all in the room, and you're going to ask each one of them your question. So you're going to say, for example, why does drought lead to wildfire? And, or let's do a more social sciencey one. Why do wildfires lead to, why and how do wildfires lead to displacement? So you might have one person say, well, the thing to understand is that the people who lose their houses are often on the urban wildlife interface. So they're on the edges of the town. So some of them are very wealthy, but some of them might be very poor as well. And somebody else might say, oh, but it really hits low-income people more because they tend to be underinsured. And somebody else might say, yeah, and the other thing is it hits low-income people hardest because they haven't had the money to fireproof their house and upgrade it. So each one of them would say something different about why and how wildfire leads to displacements, right? So it's a debate in answer to your question. That's what this thing is that you're writing. So the two models of how you organize this that are most common in social science are in quantitative and policy-based social science. You'll often get into this one I call debate and adjudication. So some people think A is the cause of this and other things B is. I want to find out who's right. There's also another one called synthesis, which is very common in social sciences and humanities. So, for example, I have somebody who's looking at how COVID has changed the way undocumented domestic workers are organizing. So if you think about it, you can imagine that he might draw from several different literatures. So there's just, you might find nothing that's written exactly on that, but maybe you'll find something on how the labor movement and its organizing has been affected by COVID. But maybe they talk about school teachers. And maybe somebody else talks about undocumented workers, but they don't talk about domestic workers. And maybe somebody talks about domestic workers and how they organize, but they don't say anything about COVID. So you can see how you might kind of, take the three strands and braid them together to come up with your own approach. And you'll have to say how none of them quite answer your question. And that's why you need to make this original contribution. Does this make sense at all? Okay, I will say people often come to my workshops many times, and you are all invited. You can come if you want. They are open to the public. I'll show you where the announcements are. I won't be giving them till next year though. Okay, so once you have your authors, you usually describe first the authors whose work is farthest from your own, but still relevant, then those a little bit closer to your position, and then those closest to yours, but they're still not quite right. And then your own hypothesis and approach and how you derived it in what I call the grand finale paragraph. In your case, it may be the grand finale sentence, because you're talking about something with a different length. I call this also the Goldilocks lit review. Remember Goldilocks? This one's too small, this one's too big, this one's just right, almost just right. And then there's yours. All right. You usually talk more about the authors whose approach is closer to yours because they are more useful to you. For each approach named, you say what you use from it, but then why it's still insufficient to answer your question. This is kind of long and drawn out, so I'm gonna skip this for now. This is just an example of how I did this in my own dissertation. So let me talk about the method section. Now, you don't have a lot of space to put in a lot of specifics, but in general, even within the space you do have, you want it to be as specific as possible. So you don't just want to say, I'm going to do some interviews. You want to say who, how many, what you're going to ask, what kind of interviews. Are these in-depth interviews where there's kind of open questions? Are they survey type interviews where everyone answers exactly the same question and you ask them strongly agree, strongly disagree? So try to be really specific. Even if it might change, it's understood it will change, but the committee always wants to see that you are capable of planning with a high level of specificity, that you can go from an objective that's going to be carried out over the next year or the next 6 months or over the summer, but you're going to be able to translate it into a daily task list. All right. Now, another thing that we often look for in a plan is that it be chronological. So first I'm going to do this, and that will allow me to go on and do this, and then I'll do that, and then finally I'll do this. So imagine, think about the best manual you've ever read and why it was good. Usually there's some way it broke down the task into its smaller components and it made it non-intimidating. Sometimes there were nice pictures. My favorite manuals actually are the IKEA manuals, with the screws magically screwing themselves into the right hole and everything. Your timeline, you want to cover the timeline that the grant covers. So for Haas scholars, it's from background research through the final product. Are these proposals for summer? Jasmine, I forgot to ask that.
Oh, sorry, what was the question again?
Are these proposals for the summer? When are they supposed to carry out the project?
Oh, it's not for summer.
So it's for the school year? Or
Yes, the submission for this research proposal will be March 12th, and we opened submissions about 2-3 weeks ago, and they will start continuing their research for the next 2 to 3 months.
I see. So it's going to happen this semester.
Yes.
Great. Okay. So you would want to, your proposal would want to cover from whenever you are going to hear about the acceptance or approval of the proposals to when you have to stop, which is, I guess, at the end of the semester. Overarching principles of the plan, you want to be really specific. Wait, I covered that already, sorry. For each phase of research, I know you don't have very much space here, but to the extent that you can, in an ideal world, these are the things that you would include? You would say what the phase is called, when will the phase take place, so what you're going to do in March and April and May. What specifically are you going to do during that phase? Why does that make more sense than other things you might do to collect the data? And what will you learn from this phase that's going to allow you to go on to the next one? We can skip this about human subjects. No questions? Okay. Budget, I'm just going to cover this really quickly because it's not part of what you have to do, but when you do come to a moment in life when you have to write a budget, you have to follow the rules really carefully of what items and amounts are permitted by the grant that you're applying to. You want to include quotes of exact amounts and how you got them, like have a website or something like that. You want to put items in categories with subtotals and totals. And you want to give this part the same attention as the plan. People often will kind of throw the budget together at the last minute, and that can be a really big mistake because in my case, the faculty selection committee can get really mad. That's what my proposal looks like. All right, now the statement of purpose, which is a half page at the beginning of the proposal that students write to apply to my program, is quite similar to what you are doing. The headings aren't identical, but it is essentially asking for the same thing. So at some point you want to say what your final product is going to be. Are you coming up with a business plan? Are you trying to answer a research question? Are you going to write it up somehow? You want to state your question and you want to state it really clearly, or your objective if you have a public service or a business objective. You want to justify your choice of case and then talk about what's been done and what's not done yet and how your project is going to contribute to fill that gap. And then the plan is what you call methods. How are you going to narrow down your case? What procedure and type of method are you going to use? And the sequence of phases, again, stuff as much specificity as you can within that limited space that you have. And then the rationale, which is called significance, larger implications, we spoke about before. I'm going to skip that. All right, so now this is the big picture. So again, you're going to start with a quick overview. I call it statement of purpose. It's called intro in yours. Then you'll get into the background and I think you call statement of purpose intro and background. Then you have the justification, which you call objective and significance. You're going to show the work that you build on and show how you're different from the work that already exists. Then your methods, feasibility in terms of time. And qualifications. Oh, no, sorry. Yeah, so basically these three parts. All right, and now I'm coming back to this point that I think is more important than any others if you don't remember anything else from this workshop. You must keep yourself happy to be productive. So, and it's actually, you know, if we're talking about a chain of causality, it's the happiness leads to productivity rather than punishing yourself to make yourself productive. So think of ways. First of all, it's okay and normal to feel intimidated by the task. So that's fine. You want to still just push past the sweaty palm stage, use those techniques I showed you at the very beginning, to put something on paper, anything. Let it be bad, okay? Just give yourself permission to write a bad draft and start showing it to people. You know, if you're feeling terribly embarrassed about it, you can put a little apologetic note. It's like, oh, this is so rough, but can you give me some feedback? Yeah, just start getting feedback on it. Get feedback and support early and often. You have these wonderful leaders who are there to encourage you. I think there's probably a writing center at your community college as well. And then show it to people, revise, show it to people, revise, and give yourself a lot of credit for taking on a new challenge. So, what are ways to gather information during pandemic time other than doing surveys? Okay, well, you can do in-depth interviews. And the experience that the students, undergraduate researchers at Berkeley have had is that actually people have more available time. They're stuck at home and they're bored. They might be more willing to interview you than they would have been pre-COVID. So an in-depth interview is where you maybe, you're talking to someone for an hour. It's pretty conversational, although you have a list of questions you want to address. But it might be something about, how did you feel about the Black Lives Matter movement? Were you part of it? What was the most exhilarating moment for you? What was the moment that really made you join a protest, for example? And those can be really interesting, and they're pretty feasible. I'm realizing when I was doing my narrowing thing, I skipped over one of the strategies. So let me scroll back just a second. Sorry. Choosing a topic. Okay. So we talked about chain of causality. We talked about in the lab setting. This is probably the most important strategy of all right now to narrow down your topic. Follow the data. Go for the low-hanging fruit. Find data that's easily available for you and figure out what questions could be answered with that data. It sounds backwards, right? Usually they tell you, come up with a question and then answer your question. But sometimes, and now is one of these times, it's so difficult to do research right now that you just have to go with practicality. So historians and archaeologists are totally clear on this. Most of their data has been destroyed, right? If you wanted to study dating, like courtship rituals among the Ohlone in 14th century in California, not a whole lot of data there, right? Maybe a few archaeological digs would shed some light on it, because maybe there's some artifacts that were used during courtship. So you would have that general question, and then you would go and find out what artifacts have been preserved relating to this culture. And then you would figure out with those artifacts, what questions could you answer? You might have to tweak it a little bit. Maybe you couldn't actually do courtship rituals, but maybe you could do a textile, women and textiles, or how textiles related to courtship. So that's really important. And then if you're doing ethnographic questions, meaning these kind of interviews that get at meaning as opposed to a large survey, your available data may mean what social settings you can access easily, you personally. So think about who you know, who you're connected to, and what interviews that might get you. Hang, I should add to my, you say what other ways to gather information during pandemic time other than doing surveys? Surveys actually aren't that undoable. There's something called Qualtrics, where you can post a survey online, like on a Facebook group, and try to get, or a Reddit group or something. And my Haas scholars that I've worked with, they have gotten like 200 surveys this way. I have one that studied people on the spectrum, and they had like a Reddit group, and another person studied people that used to be Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons and left the faith. And she got hundreds of interviews. She just posted the link. It can be done. Don't give up. All right, other questions? I'll stop the share here.
If any of you have any question, feel free to speak up, or you can put it into the chat.
Has anyone started writing your proposal? By saying started writing, has anyone? Maya, you have. Okay, so what have you written down so far? I can't tell.
Sorry, I typed too slow, so I'll just like talk about it.
Yeah, just say it out loud. I mean, there's only like 8 of us here. We can just say it out loud.
Yeah, so mostly I've written mostly about food banks, and you know how, and there's like, food banks need like a lot of, well, as of now, food banks, like they're in increased demand, right? But the thing is though, there's also like this contradictory thing where food is getting destroyed from farms. So I was wondering, I wanted to try to go and figure out and analyze what's causing this supply chain disruption, and try to go and see what we can, well, what I can do as a research to find out what's the cost effective and best way to go and stop this food waste, but actually send that food to be distributed to people who need it.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I would say, though, you remember what I talked about the always study a single link in the causal chain?
Yeah, so I'm kind of like I've kind of been like absorbing and marinating what you've said, and then like it's like I'm thinking that I might have to revise some of my proposal concepts about it. Either that, or like try to go and add on like foundationally and start like from one link to the next, and then so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think it's always difficult to study a cause of a problem and a solution for the problem at the same time. So I usually will advise students to make their main focus one or the other. So you could either like analyze some systems that seem to be working well and maybe compare two as possible solutions and focus on the solution part. Or you could kind of zero in on a particularly bad distribution problem. N95s, do you know, I learned, I think yesterday in the newspaper, this whole article about that there's tons of N95s and doctors can't get them. And they're just sitting in warehouses.
Oh,
so
I
there's
haven't
a
heard about
distribution
that.
problem for you. So you could like focus on a single product, even in a single region, and try to like follow that and tell the story of that and analyze why it went wrong.
I'll keep that in mind, but as of now, I've just been focusing on food banks because, you know, I like food. So that's why I'm like, oh my goodness. Like, and then again, the issue with food waste that's happening within farms, because there's a lot of factors at play. So it's like I'm just trying to go and try to understand the concepts of for myself as well simultaneously, while trying to convey them to a piece of paper. So
Yep.
yeah.
Exactly. All right. Well, many congratulations for getting started. Imperfect food. All right. Can Maya, the other Maya, asked, can we analyze secondary sources? I guess that's a question for your leaders. Leaders?
Apuva, can you proceed on this question?
Yes, sorry about that. I was trying to unmute and it wasn't working. Yes, you can definitely use secondary sources. In fact, we urge people to try and use a multitude of different sources rather than just going immediately for academic journals, just because we want people to play around with citing, let's say like TED Talks or other sorts of information when doing research. So we don't want it to, so that's the component of creative research, hence why we want to try and make sure that it's not just like a certain type of source. So yes, definitely.
Yeah, sometimes when it can still be original research, although it is using secondary sources if you're like building a case comparison. So there's a very, very famous book that compares the Russian, three revolutions, French, Russian, and Chinese. And it's, the entire book is from secondary sources, but what's original is that she was building this comparative method so that she could come up with this new argument. So it had never been put together in that way. All right, other questions?
What are like some of the ways to analyze secondary data or like sources?
Well, what's your field?
Like business and economics.
Well, let me do this thing about comparative research. I'm gonna have to build this. Maybe I can attempt to use the whiteboard. Oh, let's find the whiteboard extremely awkward. All right, so when you're using secondary sources to build a case comparison, you'll usually have the most common way. This is like when you're signing at the grocery store on those things. Okay. So you'll have hold on, I have to break down these texts. So this is the called the method of difference. There we go. Oh, I'm so sorry. So you're going to have constants. So you're going to try to find two cases that match each other really closely, except for one has a certain outcome. We'll call it X. And the other one doesn't have that outcome. And so what you're trying to do is compare the two cases to figure out if they're so similar in all these ways, why, and this is your question, why does case A end up with X and B ends up with not X? So this is kind of like an experiment, right? You have two test tubes that are identical, but then you add something into test tube B that you didn't add into test tube A. And if it changes color, then you know it was caused by the thing you added, right? Because you're isolating the causal variable. Let's see. And down here, we have so a very famous book that used this case, this method of difference, compared U.S. and Canada, and it was saying, well, U.S. and Canada are the same in so many really obvious ways. We're English speaking. We were both English colonies. Racially, we're very similar. The history of settlement in the West was very similar, etc. But for some reason, Canada ended up with a welfare state and we didn't. So how can this be explained? So that's the research question, right? And then the guy did all this research to try to figure out, what is different between Canada and the United States that could actually explain this difference. And what he came up with was that Canada, from the moment of the American Revolution, they began to diverge and split. And what was, one of the mottos of the American Revolution? No taxation, right? So they're very against taxation. That made it a lot harder for us to have a welfare state as part of our history. Meanwhile, Canada stayed connected with England the whole time. And when England got a welfare state, Canada kind of inherited it. I just realized that I have not been sharing. Are you looking at the whiteboard?
Yes, we are seeing the right board.
It's like I'm not seeing the green thing around it, but okay. Anyway, so that's a long answer to what do you do with secondary sources. This is the kind of thing you can do. You can pose a question through a comparative case study, like, for example, if you're looking at the food waste question and why is food destroyed on farms, you could look at two really similar farms that are right next to each other, produce the same thing, and one ended up destroying its crop and the other one didn't. And you could try to, in that way, isolate what caused the destruction.
Thank you.
Yeah, I hope that gives you some ideas. All right. I can send you the whiteboard afterwards. What else?
Is there any question left from the audience?
So I can, let me put into the chat. You're going to get the copy of the chat, right? Because you're the host.
Yes.
And then, so I put where you can find the PowerPoint. And I'm also going to put, did I stop the share? Yeah, right. I'm not sharing my screen right now, correct?
Yes, you're not sharing your screen.
Okay. And then the other thing with the strategies of how to just plain old get started, I'll put that link up. Nothing is more important than actually putting something on paper and starting to show it to people. Again, if you take nothing else away from this workshop, That's what you need to do to write a proposal. You have to get past any embarrassment and just start showing it to people. All of that. Research up. Okay. All right. Any other words of wisdom? If you, again, if it feels like it's too big, it probably is. And look again at those strategies for cutting it down. Do not fear cutting it down. I have, in 20 years of reading proposals, I think I've only read about 2 that I thought were too small. Pretty much everything else begins too big. And it's very anxiety producing when it's too big. And kind of unsatisfying, and really you only have 3 months, so it's got to be quite small, but that's fun because you can go really deep into it. It's more satisfying.
All right. Thank you so much for your presentation. I guess there won't be any question left, but can you please put your email so that if any students want to reach out, they can. And yeah, I will share the link that you posted into the chat to the Discord group we are having.
Okay, and also the whiteboard.
All right. Yes. Yes. If there's nothing else left, I think we can end the webinar right here. And thank you so much for Professor Leah for helping us with the webinar today.
Okay, you're very welcome. My pleasure. Take care.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.